For many years, political commentators have been asking themselves, how is the European Parliament relating to Israel? How is it voting on Israel issues? This week, we can answer the question in greater detail than ever before, as we present the first ever EU ranking of national political parties based on their voting record between 2019 until 2022. In this special edition of the European report, we are going to take a closer look at this ranking and discuss the results with member of the European Parliament, Alexandr Vondra, who is from the Czech Republic, a former defense minister and a former minister of foreign affairs.
Yes, thank you for the invitation.
Your party is, by the way, the most friendly in the whole parliament, which is quite impressive. We will be joined today by Tomas Sandell of the European Coalition for Israel. Thank you for joining me. My name is Yossi Lempkowicz from European Jewish Press and Europe-Israel Press Association. This is the European Report. Tomas Sandell, I will start with you. Why your organization, the European Coalition for Israel, decided to order such a survey? And also, is it reliable?
Well, thank you, Yossi, for the question. As you know, you have been following EU-Israel relations for many years, as has the European Coalition for Israel, but there has never been any hard facts. This is partly due to the fact that in the European Council, where our foreign ministers meet and decide on issues related to Israel, there are no official voting records. These are all, closed meeting, and how each country is voting is something which, is not for the normal EU citizen to know. So we thought that it would be good once and for all to look closer at this, and that's why we ordered this survey from EU Matrix, which is a very respectable research institute here in Brussels, to do it systematically, look at items which are related clearly to Israel and see how have the political parties voted. So I believe this is important for the debate on EU-Israel relations, and I think this can also start a much more intelligent and informative discussion on how Europe is looking at Israel in this very critical time.
So this is the first EU ranking?
This is the first ever EU ranking, which of course makes it historical. We would like to do this on an annual basis, so we could also see, developments as to, what happens in the respective member countries, but also what happens within the political groups.
MEP Vondra, of course, the big question of such a survey is to know who came on the top of this ranking. This is also why we have invited you, Alexandr Vondra, to the program to try to understand why your party, the Civic Democratic Party, is so supportive of Israel. So my question is why?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I think, it's really a pleasure to see my own party as a gold medalist of this ranking. That's the Czechs are not used to win, except of the hockey game. But on the other hand, I'm not as much surprised, because the fact is, there is this famous Henry Kissinger statement that the states don't have the friends but the interests. And as a Czech, we do have one exception, and that's, I think, a matter of certain consensus in the country, that Israel is a friend. And it's not just, and this moment of history, it's something what is lasting very long time. Tomas Masaryk, the first president of Czechoslovakia, was a Zionist who actively promoted, the idea of the Jewish resettlement in the Middle East. He was the first president.
The Zionist idea.
Zionist idea. Mm-hmm. The first president coming to Palestine in 1920s to support the Zionist idea. Then, under the communists, at the beginning, Czechoslovak government in 1948 was equipping Israel and its defense against the Arab aggression by guns. It's still very memorable events in your country, and I still, occasionally listening, thank you very much, how did you help us in 1948? Then, of course, under pressure from Stalin, we had to deviate from this, but 1967 was another Arab aggression, which generated a lot of sympathy during the Prague Spring. So, we were always with the David against the Goliath. So, and then I was working with Václav Havel in Charter 77 and accompanying him in the Prague Castle when he was elected in the revolution in the late 1989. And, in this first New Year famous speech, there was not so much about the foreign policy, but there was a sentence. One of the first priority, what we have to do is to reestablish the relationship with our friend Israel. And since that, it's a matter of the consensus. So, Havel, President Klaus, President Zeman could fight any domestic fights, but on Israel, they were all united. So that's a factor. ODS is one of the leading Czech parties, so it's logical because we are from the Czech Republic. And secondly, we are part of the ECR, so the European Conservatives, and in this era when the left is much criticizing current Israeli government, so this is not what the ECR would share. So Bibi Netanyahu is in fact our partner, and we also have a strong trust that Israel is a deeply rooted democracy, and it does not need any lecture by the others how to fix its domestic challenges.
Turning to you, Tomas, the initiator of this EU ranking, how would you best summarize the results of this ranking? And my question is, are these results what you expected, or are there some surprises?
Yes, I think the given was, of course, that Czech in one way or another would be on top. I mean, for any of us who have followed the EU-Israel relations for many years, we know that the exceptionalism of the Czech Republic. And it's an honor for us, Mr. Vondra, to have you in the studio representing this great nation. I think the results are a reflection of what most people who are professionals would expect. That is, on the one hand, politically, you'll find more sympathy in the right of the center parties represented here in the European Parliament. The ECR group was mentioned, IND, European People's Party, all the way to the Liberal Renew. When you come on the political left, as Mr. Vondra said, it's much more problematic, and they tend to be much more critical, which could be analyzed separately. Geographically, we also have a very clear indication. The new EU member state from Central and Eastern Europe are much more supportive of Israel. And Czech, of course, is the best examples, but there are many other neighboring countries, Slovakia, Hungary, of course, Romania, Bulgaria, even Poland. And I think one of the surprises actually in the ranking is looking at Poland, how supportive they are of Israel in the European Parliament, given that there has been this what some call a diplomatic crisis between Poland and Israel. And at the same time, they see that the Poles have been very supportive of Israel here in Brussels. You can also see particular changes. Take a country like Sweden that historically have been in this group of sometimes say the three least friendly EU member states. Now suddenly there's a shift in Sweden, and we see it in particular in the European People's Party group, which of course is the largest voting bloc in the European Parliament. But within the European People's Party, the two parties which are the most pro-Israel are both Swedish. So on the one hand, the Christian Democrats, on the other hand, we have Moderaterna, the Conservative Party, which is now forming the government. On top of that, we have the Swedish Democrats, again part of ECR, who are, I think, on number 8 in the whole ranking of some 180 political party, if I'm not mistaken. So on the one hand, yes, it is what we expected, but I think when you look more in depth into the statistics, you'll find also quite surprising results.
MEP Vondra, what are your comments to such a survey, the ranking, both on national political parties and also we will see it later, we'll speak about this. There's, Tomas mentioned it, it's also about EU member states, so yes. Both.
I have gone through the table and the rankings, so I very much agree what Tomas has said here, that there are some, for me, unsurprising general results. That right is more pro-Israeli than the left, for example. So it's exactly, ECR is at the top, then, EPP, good, but then it's going worse, Macron, Renew, and then Socialist, and then the Greens and the Communists. So they are really down in the then it's another phenomenon, I think, that, if you have a larger Muslim population, then it's more anti-Israeli stand, because they are forced by their domestic electorate to. So classically, Belgium is worse than, for example, Netherlands. I'm a bit surprised that Sweden is doing better for Israel than Denmark. It's something against, the history, because Denmark was, during the war was very helpful. But Bulgaria is still at the top, so something does not change. I think, the Czechs, not just ODS, it's really at the top. So we had this 97% support, but the others are slightly, still above 60, is part of the EPP. But be careful, there is a Pirate Party, which is gathering the support among the young people, and they are part of the Greens. So they are doing for Israel better than many Green parties in Europe, but not as much as the German Greens. So, even with the Czechs, we have to work with the young people. It should not be taken for granted. So what are the other surprises? Maybe, if you are reading just this leftist liberal press in Europe or in the world, you could have imagined that Poland or even Hungary are anti-Semite countries, and out of this ranking, they are really at the top. Poland is on the top as a country, and PiS in particular, who is the governing party, and even Fidesz, the Hungarian, is among the top 10.
But we mentioned that this ranking is not only about political parties, but also EU member states. My question is to you, why is your country, the Czech Republic, so friendly towards Israel? And how would you comment this national ranking where also your neighboring countries are doing so well? Why these Eastern European countries are friendly towards Israel than the Western EU member states.
You know, due to the time of the Cold War, you know, for 40 years we have lost our democracy, we have lost our freedom because of the Soviet occupation, because of the Soviet imperialism. And thus maybe we value the freedom and democracy more, and thus have the really sympathy for Israel as a, you know, sea of democracy encircled by the ocean of undemocratic regimes. So there is this elementary sympathy. It's one factor. Second, in the Czech case, it's really the deep tradition, as I already explained. And then third, I would say we don't have Muslim community. You know, we are talking now in Brussels, and it's not secret in the territory of the larger Brussels, Mohammed is the most frequent name given to the newborn children. This is no way in Prague. You know, Mohammed is nowhere to be seen, while David is keeping a position among top 10, you know, for the boys. So, you know, there is not this kind of a pressure to which, for example, the politicians in Belgium and France are exposed, or even United Kingdom, not just to be inside, even the outside of the Union. So we are in different, operating in a bit different environment.
And we have to remember that as Israel is celebrating its 75th anniversary, the Independence Day, tonight, we have to remember that the Czech Republic, at the time Czechoslovakia, played a very important role with Israel when the nation was nascent, with providing arms to the country when all the Arab countries attacked Israel.
Exactly, and I have to tell you that Czechs in general, for most of 20th century, were basically Philo-Semites. Our intellectuals love Jews. They were taken as a part of our culture, heritage, Kafka and others. It was appreciated by the politicians. I mentioned Tomas Masaryk, the first president of Czechoslovakia. I mentioned Václav Havel, who helped to bring the freedom back to the country. So this is a uniqueness of the Czechs. Some others in Central Europe, maybe to some extent Poles, they have some legacy of being on the other side in the past, and maybe the desire to get this out has played a role, and the fact the politics also to some extent, Netanyahu government is broadly criticized by the European left, and again we have a deep trust in Israeli democracy. I have an understanding, on one hand, for the debate about judiciary. Because, if the elected politicians got the impression that, the judiciary is being hijacked somewhere, and we can see this in Europe too, then it's a room for some debate, democratic debate. And on the other hand, if you have people gathering on the streets, protesting, that's also the expression of democracy. So I have deep trust in Israel, and I don't feel the need, to lecture your country about democracy. I have a really deep trust.
Thomas, what factors decide how a country, a EU member state, relates to Israel? And has this changed over the time?
Yeah, as to reiterate what has been said, that political orientation seems to be a determining factor here in the European Parliament, but also national culture, if you can put it this way. And I think here Czech is an exception. It's interesting to look at, say, two countries, Germany on the one hand, Sweden on the other. Sweden have had this problematic relation with Israel, which has changed with the introduction of the new government, which has then a different political persuasion. Germany, when we look at CDU and CSU, that governed Germany for many years, not at the moment, are not typically on the top of the list in EPP, and they are rather in the middle. Whereas conventional wisdom would have it that Germany is the strongest guarantee and support for Israeli sovereignty. And I think the facts that we see now for the first time would tend to give it a slightly more moderate interpretation, to say that Germany is somewhere in the middle. They are in no way exceptional friends of Israel. So these are things that changes over time.
MEP Vondra, do you think that this kind of survey is helpful for members of the European Parliament like you and their parties? Do you think that there could be perhaps improvements because, as Tomas said, there will be, this is the first EU ranking, but there will be more in the future? Mm-hmm.
Now look, first of all, I'm a politician, so, you know, it's up to you to make those studies, analyses, and the rankings. You know, I think it should not be done by the politicians because it would be inevitably split somehow. That's my first comment. Second comment, look, I think it's very useful. It's very valuable. You know, for me, it's also fun because, you know, everybody likes to be a gold medalist, and at least somewhere we are winning. And I think it's important also to have this kind of a reflection for the other countries, you know, because, look, the map is interesting. You know, in France, they should read it. In Spain, they should read it, you know. Spanish, you know, there's a tradition of very strong Jewish culture in the past, and despite that, they are really one of the lowest in. And, you know, I have to tell you, in discussing, you know, we do have some Spanish party too in our group. It's entirely different. It's very pro-Israeli. It's among the top 10. And that's a party which is relatively new. It's originated in Andalusia, so it's on the European front line, you know, very close to North Africa. They do have the experience with the migration from the south. And thus, you know, this kind of a frontline mentality, they have the understanding the security challenges which Israel is facing. Mm-hmm. While, you know, those young women from Barcelona, you know, representing social democrats here, they are living in a kind of a bubble mentality, and thus maybe they are dreaming that the world is just a fairy tale and paradise that nobody threatens. And thus, you know, they have the tendency to lecture everybody in the world. So definitely it's very useful, and I hope that those who will read it, and among them those who, you know, are lower in the grading, would at least reflect this somehow.
Last questions, Tomas. Of course, this ranking has a clear focus on Israel. Mm-hmm. But what about related topics like anti-Semitism, fostering Jewish life in Europe? My question is a party that is supportive of Israel automatically also supportive of Jewish lives, fostering Jewish life in the country, for example, in the case of circumcision or ritual slaughter?
Yeah. First of all, it's important to point out that this is a non-partisan survey, so we don't have a political agenda. It will be up to others to analyze the results. But it's true And it's important to be pointed out that what was not covered by the ranking is attitudes towards Jewish life in Europe. You mentioned kosher slaughtering and circumcision, which are not covered by EU law. So hence there are no votes in the European Parliament. But here, yes, it is possible to be pro-Israel and critical of Jews or Jewish life. And we have clear examples of this in Europe, of parties that would be scoring well. This is certainly not the case for Czech Republic, but in other parts of Europe. So this needs to be pointed out. Secondly, I think also this relates to countries that have a problematic past, going to back to the time of the Holocaust, and Mr. Vondra mentioned this already. See in the case of Poland, some problematic views on the role of Hungary during the Second World War. But these are parties and countries that today are very pro-Israel. Whereas, on the other hand, on the progressive left, you have people who are very sensitized to what they did wrong during the Second World War, but today do not reflect this change of heart in their attitudes towards the State of Israel or the Jewish people. So, of course, this is complex. I believe this is a first step into a more informative and intelligent debate on EU-Israel relations, but a lot of analysis needs to be done.
This brings us to a close of this special edition of the European Report, where we have presented this first ever EU ranking of national parties in their relations to Israel. You can find the presentation and the results on the website of the European Coalition for Israel, www.ec4i.org. My name is Yossi Lempkowicz, and this has been the European Report. See you again next month.